Hi, I'm Chris and I'm a weaver, and I'm here to show you how to weave and the parts of a loom and how it all works together. This is a loom. Back up, kind of see the whole beautiful loom. This is called a floor jack loom because it rests on the floor. As opposed to a tabletop loom or something like that. And it's called a jack loom. Come look at this. The mechanism that I raise and lower these harnesses are with these jacks here. Can you get a There you go. See, that's called a jack. It's like a jackman. These things go back and forth. But that's just a technical detail that we don't have to really worry about for now. So I have set this loom up a while ago for this article that I'm making, which is a scarf. It's about 10 inches wide. It's got all these colors. I dyed the yarn myself. I did not spin the yarn myself. I did not grow the yarn myself. That was for some sheep in South Africa who did that for me. So thank you, sheep from South Africa. I will be weaving for a while, and then along the way I'll go into various details of various parts of the process as they come up. But I will start right now to say that before I put this scarf on the loom, I had somewhat of a sense of what I wanted it to look like with the design, and I used a computer program called Weave Dreamer to help me design this, and that helped me to figure out which pattern to put all the threads on the loom and the colors and what pattern I use when I'm weaving. And when I say weave, I mean that putting this thread back and forth. I'm going to start with the two basic parts of weaving. It's called the warp and the weft. The warp are the strings that go along the way. When we say we warp a loom, that means that we put all the warp strings on the loom. Come over here and get like a straight away view of that. These strings that are along the long way, and can you get that in back? Yeah. So those are called the warp threads. The strings that go the left and right is called the weft. I like to think of it as weft and white. The weft goes weft and white. So I have the color that I'm currently weaving with. I have it on a bobbin, and the bobbin goes into a shuttle. So we attach this bobbin winder onto the table. I'm putting the bobbin. Yes. I'm putting the bobbin there, and I'm taking this ball of yarn that I had wound before, putting it in that box so when it jumps around it won't go too crazy. Wind it around a couple times, and then here we go. So I wind it, and I just kind of guide it left and right to get it even. So you can see how even it's wound. Okay, that's probably good. If we make it too big and bulky, then it ends up sticking to the sides, and it doesn't let go of the thread very well. So I take it out of the winder. I'm going to put it in the here, it's going to the light here. I'm going to put it in such a direction that it comes out of the bottom. It unwinds from the bottom, and then I put it through that slot. And we we have our shuttle again. And when I press on a foot pedal, it will lift a certain set of strings, and I have to look at this pattern to find out which one I need to do next. So oh, beautiful. Let's just keep going. 6. Now I'm finding I'm pounding it a little bit too hard. So let's talk about the beater for a moment. So all of these warp threads are, each thread is put through one heddle, and each heddle is connected to one of the 6 harnesses, and a set of harnesses is raised each time I raise a foot pedal. There are 2 threads through each of these reeds. This is called a reed. So this is a reed. It's called a reed, and they come in various pitches, which means the number of spaces per inch. This one happens to be 8 reeds per inch. The one I have on this loom is 12 reeds per inch, and as you can see, the threads are put through it to keep them in line, and it also keeps the piece at a not a standard width, but a consistent width. And that's one of the purposes of the reed. It helps us keep things in order. But another big purpose is that it becomes part of this beater mechanism, where every time I put a pass of yarn through, I beat that yarn down to push that yarn close to the fabric that I'm making, and that will tighten the weave and give us a nice tight structured pattern. This has 12 spaces per inch, but there's actually 2 strings that go through each space, so this it turns out to be 24 threads per inch. So this scarf that I'm making here is 24 threads per inch as I'm weaving it. So there are 2 threads through each space in the reed. Every pass that I make, I need to make it tight. I need to have the fibers be tight with the rest of the fabric. So every pass, I take the beater and I go boom. Now I don't push it really hard. With all my experience, I've gotten to know just the right touch to do for which beater. If I beat it too much, the threads are going to be too close together in this horizontal direction, and the pattern will become smushed. If I didn't beat it enough, the pattern might be unsmushed or too tall rather than too squashed. So it's an art. It's part of the art. It's part of the art. So every pass that I do, let's see, what number are we on here? Number 1, 6, 5. So I'm going to go around. So I bring it through, and boom, just really light touch. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, this I want to keep the thread that is resting a little bit tighter. Bring that slack out. Okay, 1, 6. Oh. Okay, 5. Now I hit 5, and I remember that 5 is one of my turnarounds. So I'm going to put 5 through. We ran out of our bobbin of the colored thread, but I'm going to put it through. Okay. So what I need to do is now I need to bobbin more of the colored. So come with me. Come with me to our loud bobbin winder. Oh, and be careful of walking into your other shuttle thread. It's like a web in here. There's lots of spiders here too, keeping me company. They give me they watch over me and make sure that I'm doing weaving correctly. Okay, so this is interesting. This is the green to blue transition, and I'm at the end of the blue there. Well, I want to continue weaving with blue. So if I wind this on the bobbin, the blue is going to be on the inside. Well, anyway, so what I need to do is I need to wind some of it there, but I need to take that off. I need to take this off, put it back in the bobbin, put it back in the shuttle, and I'm going to rewind it on another bobbin.
Oh, nice. I see.
So that, here, I'm just going to put that on the floor here. Now we get lots of noise. Okay, so now I can put this bobbin back in here, and we have our green on the outside that we're going to continue weaving with.
Wow, that is a really trick. That's a really good trick of the trade.
It's a trick of the trade. Well, that's what happens when you do, when you're weaving with variable colors, because the inside is on the outside, etc. When you're knitting or crocheting, it doesn't matter. You just keep going. But with weaving, it's a slightly different process. It's kind of like DNA. Everything's twisted around each other, just like DNA, just like nature. So, oh, look how beautiful those colors are. So let's see here. So we were on 5, and are we going to turn around? Let's see. So this was 1. This is supposed to be 1.5. So I guess our next color area is supposed to be 2 inches wide. So we can put a couple of diamonds in. We'll just continue with our diamond pattern. We're not going to make a super diamond like we did here. Okay, so we're at 5, but we're going to turn around, so we go to 6. So let's put in as much of this 6 as we can. Boop. All right. Well, this is perfect. It's the color is kind of matches the warp color of this green. So I'm going to put that in, and so it will be less noticeable. And I'll lift that up. Okay, boom. So we'll cut these. We'll cut these when we're done. 6, 1. Now, look at that shed there. Can you see that shed?
Uh-huh, it's 3.
The shed is the space between the strings that are lifted and the strings that are in their rest position. And that gives room for the shuttle to go through. So I'm going to go through the shed, and then I'm going to come up at the top of the floating selvage. And then when I do my next pattern pass, I'm going to go around that floating selvage from below. And what that means is that every time that I make a pass, that floating selvage will be caught and be part of the woven structure. It won't be loose. There won't be any loose strings. Depending on your pattern and the way that you tie it up, there might be some strings that never get included in the weaving, but by including a floating selvage, you're assured that the edge will always have, will always be woven in. So, there looks like there's 3 layers, and that's because one of these harnesses, number 2, gets stuck. And so it's 2 was up from another pedal, but it's like, oh God, that's in the way. It's not pushing down all the way. It's not falling down. And that's a problem. That's a problem of the loom. It's something to do with very slight maladjustment of pressure or friction or alignment. So sometimes what helps is putting wax on the side so it slides better. So you just got to watch out for that. And if you put your shuttle through and you're below a set of strings that you're supposed to be above, it will change the pattern, and it won't look perfect. It won't. You'll notice a mistake. That'll be a mistake. 6, 5. Pull our slack through. 4, 3, 2, 1, 6, 5. Now, we could turn around on 5 here, but we didn't complete our big diamond, so I'm going to go one more round of 6 pedal passes. 4, 3, 2, 1, 6, 5. Okay, so we're at 5 again, and I go, what is the time? Yes, it's time to turn around, so I'll turn around. Now, I want you to focus on here, this hidden string that I've been hiding because we're going to reuse it again. It gets kind of caught up in the piece. So if we pull it, it takes up all the slack, and then it's beautiful again. And you don't really see it. I mean, you could see it if you look closely, but it doesn't really show in the piece. Wow. Sometimes I get so much joy of looking at the piece while I'm doing it. It's just really fun. So let's talk about this pattern for a bit here. So this is called a weaving draft, and it's like I say, I made it with a program. But I'll just describe to you what the parts are. Every vertical column here at the top, that's called the threading pattern, is every vertical column represents a thread, and there's one black dot in each, there's only one black dot per column. So like this one here, that's saying in heddle, put in a heddle on harness 6, put a light blue thread. This one here is saying in heddle on harness 1, put a dark blue. Harness 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is saying for, okay, each vertical column is a thread. Each horizontal line is a harness. And I told you that I have a 6 harness, I have an 8 harness loom, but I'm only using 6 harnesses. And so this is a 6 harness design. So the first line here, the bottom line, is harness 1. So everywhere there's a dot on the bottom line, there's a thread in harness 1. So here's the first harness. If I lift up the first harness, there's only a subset of threads that come up. Every thread, every harness on every excuse me, the language gets a little bit crazy here. Every heddle on harness 1 has a thread through it. So every thread that's connected to harness 1 gets lifted when harness 1 is lifted. Those harness 1, these are all the threads on harness 1. And it just shows what the pattern is. On row 2 are all the threads for harness 2, etc. And I can also, with this program, I can also show the particular colors so we can get a sense of what the pattern will look like. So I use that for when I was threading up this loom. This is a guide for how to do all that. These numbers are just showing the number of threads from the middle. So I can see that it has 108 on the edge, and then I put the floating selvages. So I want to bring attention to this little square here. That's called the tie-up. And what that means is that, again, the horizontal rows are the harnesses. So in this case, it's saying harness 1, harness 2, and harness 3 are connected to foot pedal 1. The vertical columns are the foot pedals. So we have pedal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So pedal 1 has harness 1, 2, and 3. So when I press foot pedal 1, harnesses 1, 2, and 3 lift, which in turn lift all the threads associated with harness 1, 2, and 3, which in turn, which lift those threads, and that gives the pattern for foot pedal 1. When I do foot pedal 2, I get a slightly different pattern. It's hard to see here because they're so close together, but they are different. And foot pedal 2 lifts up harnesses 2, 3, and 4. Foot pedal 3 lifts up harnesses 3, 4, and 5. Pedal 4 lifts up harnesses 4, 5, and 6. Pedal 5 lifts up harnesses 5, 6, and 1, because you can say 5, 6, and 7, but it kind of wraps around. It's kind of like 7 modulo 6. And then foot pedal 6 lifts up harnesses 1, 2, and 3. All right, so that's the second piece of the threading puzzle for weaving. Now the third part is the pedaling pattern. So I told you that I have all these pedals hooked up to these different harness patterns. Well, every time I press a foot pedal, one of those patterns will be executed for that pass of the weft string when I go across. This on the right here, it's saying do pedal 6, pass. Pedal 5, put a string through. Pedal 4, put a string through. Pedal 3, put a string through. Pedal 2, put a string through. Pedal 1, put a string through. Then wrap around to number 6 again. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. And then it says go to 3, 4, 5, 6. Whatever this pedaling pattern is, every time I press the pedal, I put a string through. Here, get the... every time I put a pass through, let's see, what's this, number 2? So here I am on pedal number 2. I put a string through and beat it. Then I do the next one in the pattern. In this case, it's number 1. Put a string through and beat it. Next one in the pattern, put a string through and beat it. So essentially, this pattern here, this pedal pattern is saying, press that foot pedal, put the string through, and beat it. And you can see that every one of these pedal patterns references a essentially a raster, a horizontal line of pattern. And adding up, when we have all of these patterns go in sequence, they, I don't know how to say, they combine to form the overall pattern of the piece. And so basically, the piece that we're weaving is a function of the pedal pattern, the harness tie-up pattern with each pedal, and the threading pattern of each harness. And then you can add color on top of that, but basically the weaving pattern is those three pieces. And we have a wonderful piece. So I hope that gives you at least introductory sense of how a loom works, and I am happy to answer any and all questions because I'm sure there's lots of them. Hi, it's me again. I'm here to show you the back of the loom, some features that are useful. First of all, you'll see that the warp threads that we saw from the front, they come around in the back, around this bar, and then around the back beam, and are rolled up. When I set this loom up, I rolled all of these warp threads around this beam, taking up all of the warp length that I wanted to use, and then what's left is going to the front and into the weaving process there. So I want to point out, though, this piece of paper here. What's that for? Well, when you wind all the threads together, if it was just the threads touching each other and everything, some of the threads would fall into the other layers and stick to each other, and it would mess with the tension of the threads. We want all these threads to be as evenly tensioned as possible. That will give us a nice consistent fabric at the end. And so putting the piece of paper in there, it distributes the tension among all the threads, and it makes it even so that we don't have to worry about the threads getting caught in each other and stuff like that. And as we weave, as we use up more warp and let more warp go from the back beam, the paper just unrolls. Another thing you'll notice are these hanging threads, and you're like, what's going on there? Well, there's a couple reasons. First of all, if we have a broken warp string, broken warp strings are just, they happen. They're just kind of difficult though, because if it broke somewhere up there and I have the other part here, that's the other side of the broken string, I can't tie it together because there's no room to tie a knot. I could tie some extra string in there, some extra thread. That would work, but there's difficulties and challenges with that. And the main challenge is trying to maintain the same tension that the normal warp strings, the ones that aren't broken, to maintain the same tension that they have. There's a certain tension here that I work with when I weave. So rather than try to tie on a new string and deal with the difficulty of a knot, and a knot will loosen and the tension will be loose as you weave anyway, what I do is I just take a new string. Let's say I broke my string. Let's say I have a scarf that's 2 yards long and I broke it about the 1 yard mark. Well, I'm going to get a piece of string for as much as I need for the rest of the piece, so in this case a yard, plus some extra to make sure I have some surplus. So let's say I had a 2 yard piece of string that I wanted to add to. So I would take that 2 yards, and what I do is I I wind that extra string onto a bolt here. This looks like a 2-inch, 1/4-inch bolt. And I think it weighs about 1 1/4 ounces. And I found that if I wind it around the bolt, and I made these little bags to hold another bolt. So this is a little bolt bag. And I put both of those in there. And just kind of give it a little wind up with its string. And what that does is that provides just the right amount of weight for this size thread to give the right tension to pretty much match the other warp threads that are already on there. So if I take this and I kind of go, oh, like pick, just kind of feel the tension, it's very similar to all the other warp threads, but it's a fix. It's a fix, so it allows me to have a warp thread that I can continue weaving on for the rest of the piece. Now you'll notice that there's 2 on the edge. Now I've gotten into the habit of using these. These are the floating selvages. These are the edge pieces. These are the threads that always get incorporated into the selvage being the edge of the woven piece. They have a tendency to break, and that's because when we use the reed to beat on the piece, the reed, remember, all the warp strings are going through a slot in the reed. Well, the ones on the outside, they get the most tension. They get the most, you'll notice that there's 2 strings on the outside. Those are the floating selvages. The strings on the edge of the piece to get incorporated into the selvage, the edges of the piece, they are on the outside, so they undergo the most stress when being put through the reed. Remember, the reed, all the strings go through it, and we beat it down. Well, the width of the threads as put on the loom, as put through the reed itself, is a certain width. But as we weave, there's a tendency for the fibers to kind of collect and squeeze in just a little bit. And so what that means is that there's somewhat of an angle of every thread. The ones in the middle, the angle is 0, minimal. And as you go out to the edge, the angle between the outside of the threads on the loom and the outside of the threads on the woven piece is greatest on the outside. So what I do is I put these floating selvages on weights, and what that does, it allows the threads to have some pull, some give. So this is still the same tension as all these other strings, but if there's a stress on it, then it's allowed to give because it's just riding on this little curve here with that weight. So that really helps to minimize breaking strings on the edge, and it's really helped me a lot in the past. So it's really good for the soul and the mind because it minimizes broken strings. Another interesting thing about weighted warps is that we have found very old looms, I believe from 10,000 years ago, that's how the warp was warped. It was with weights rather than winding it around a beam like this. This beam, winding it around, that's a technology. So if you didn't have the beam, if you just had the strings and tied them to rocks, then you have your tension for your warp. So it's interesting that a very old technique comes into use today. Another feature I want to share is the braking mechanism. So actually, this back beam is always on a brake. It's always stayed. It's stuck. And when we release the brake, there's a pedal up front that pulls on this rope here. That rope pulls on this lever, and that releases the tension here, and that allows the back beam to move freely. So I hit the brake when I am advancing the warp, and then let go of the brake, and then it holds it still again. So that's what holds it and keeps it, its tension, keeps the warp tension. I want to share with you a little bit about the dyeing techniques that I used for the batch of scarves that I currently have on the loom. I did some experiments. I have some experience with the concentrations of the dyes, and I made a chart here with various amounts of dye and percentages of the weight of dye powder per the weight of fiber of wool that was being dyed. And so I kept track of that, and these are the results of the dye pattern. Most of them are pretty good. I think this one was too dark, and so I did it over in a subsequent batch so that it was more to my liking. And this way I have a record of the percentages of the concentration of basically the dye powder to the wool, to the fiber being dyed. And so I can recreate this shade later on if I want in any quantity. So I don't just record 1 tablespoon of dye per gallon of water. No, I did how much did the wool weigh, and how many grams of dye did I use, and so I get a ratio that I can use for future reference to reproduce a color. So I want to talk a little bit about plaid that I made. This is my first plaid. It's made of cotton, which is a mixture of cotton and linen, which is made from flax. And it's a really nice fiber. It's strong, and it will get softer as time goes on. So the fabric is this wide, and you can see that it has a repeating pattern. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's got 10 repeating patterns of the unit plaid, which is a square. And we'll see that in the computer program depiction of it that I used to design it. If you can see the threads, it's the characteristic plaid. This is a twill plaid. It's two. Each thread goes over 2 and under 2, and then that pattern is staggered. So you end up with a staggered pattern in the final piece. So by choosing the colors appropriately, you can get certain effects, as I did here. So this tie-up determines what the horizontal pattern will be for each petal. So then when we vary our petal pattern and do it in a pattern, here it's just 1, 2, 1, 6, 5, 4, like descending order, and then 1 wraps around to 6. If we just keep doing that, we're going to get a pattern that's all the same direction. And then here, where we go 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and then turn around to go 3, 4, 5, 6, we see that the pattern turns around. So those horizontal patterns that we stacked up on each other start going the other direction. Very straightforward, actually. So by determining this petal pattern, we can see what the resulting pattern of the entire piece will be. Here's another example of a little more exotic, and you could see the petal pattern determines what pattern the final piece will be once you start weaving, but the threading pattern determines what that petal pattern will produce. So here we have a fairly regular threading pattern until it turns around, and you could see that the threading pattern also determines where there's a turnaround, but in this case where it turns around in the vertical direction. So by playing with these turnarounds, as I call them, we can kind of determine what patterns we have. So here we have a similar tie-up, and then the petal pattern is all the same until we turn around. I mean, actually, that's a turnaround. If we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, and then we turn around to 1, remember, it just loops around. And here we have some other patterns, and you can see that the more you play with the patterns, you can get some more exotic, different, exciting patterns in the final piece. So this was also made on the Weave Dreamer program, and I print this out more for reference. I don't have to follow these patterns directly, but it gives me an idea that as I'm weaving, if I make a pattern similar to this, I'm going to get a pattern similar to that on the final piece. And this is a little more complex. Oops, upside down, sort of. It doesn't show the threading pattern, but the threading pattern is very straightforward. This is the twill, the 4-harness twill, 2 over, 2 under. So the actual threading pattern is very straightforward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I played with some of the patterns of the petaling to see what else can I do. So by playing with the different colors and varying them, like here we have we have 4 dark, 4 light, 4 dark, 4 light in the weft and the warp. You come up with what's called a houndstooth pattern, and playing with some versions of that. So again, this gives me a sense of what I can play with in the final weave. And by appropriately using the threading, the warp colors and the weft colors, you get what's called a houndstooth. This is a very, very traditional, popular pattern. And by playing with the colors of the houndstooth, you can get other beautiful patterns in the final. Well, that's it for now. I hope that gives you a sense of how a loom works and an introductory understanding of the processes of weaving. I'd like to thank my weaving teacher, Sandy Fisher, who taught me to weave on a loom, and also how to be patient with a lot of processes of weaving. I'd also like to thank Diana Alfaro and Kelly O'Brien for running the video camera. And I'd like to thank you for watching. Thank you very much.